Peace, everybody. Welcome to MECCAcon. Today, we are doing yet another interview. This interview today is with filmmaker, exec producer, journalist, and writer, Cheo Hodari Coker. I'm going to let Cheo give himself a brief statement of who he is and what he's done, etc.
Okay. Statement. I'm Cheo Hodari Coker. I was the creator, executive producer, and showrunner for 2 seasons of Marvel's Luke Cage. I, for many years, was a journalist. I used to write for Vibe magazine, a lot of different other music publications. Wrote a book about the Notorious B.I.G. called Unbelievable: The Life, Death, and Afterlife of Notorious B.I.G. and wrote a number of movies and wrote for different TV shows. I think we're going to get into a lot of it today. So definitely excited for this opportunity, and let's get into it.
Well, I'm definitely grateful that you decided to join me today. We'll first talk about your journalism. So what got you into journalism? What was your interest? Is that what you went to Stanford University for journalism, or did you switch? What was your interest in becoming a music journalist, let alone hip hop journalist?
Well, for me, it was kind of both. I was always a huge fan of hip hop. The thing for me was I was born in New Haven, Connecticut, but grew up in Storrs. Storrs is where UConn is. And, this was UConn way before Ray Allen or anybody playing for UConn made UConn a place to be. I mean, it was literally, I was always one of the only African-Americans growing up in my class. I basically was, the black kid in Stranger Things. That was me, like all white friends, suburbia. So for me, anytime my cousins came from New York with a hip hop tape, like they would tape Red Alert off 97 Kiss in the, and just from the second I was hearing just like raw hip hop, it's all I cared about. It's all I thought about. And for me, because I wasn't around it all the time, I think it was more of an obsession for me than it was for them, because they didn't care if it was EPMD, Big Daddy Kane. Everybody who was hot, like briefly in terms of just like the net on to the next, where I would hold on to stuff with just such passion. Like I was the kind of fan that would, buy a record like It Takes a Nation to Millions to Hold Us Back by Public Enemy. And I would read the liner notes and I would try to like look out for groups before they even came out, like Leaders of the New School, Son of Berserk. I would like think about like, okay, what does an S1W do? I would think about like as like Professor Griff being the Minister of Information. Like, what does that really mean? Like, I was as much a geek in hip hop as I was anything else. And so what happened for me was right around the time I started at Stanford in 1990 was right around the time that the Source magazine started to go national, because it started off as a kind of a small publication coming out of Boston and then really began to grow. And, not knowing the age of everybody here, I know it sounds quaint and strange, but it used to be like if a record came out in one place, it would take months for that record to get somewhere else. It wasn't like it is today where somebody drops something and 100,000 people or 1 million people download it immediately. Like you had to kind of seek stuff out. And so, and it was even more true of the magazines. The thing that made the Source different than other magazines was that they really took the culture and the politics and the interviews seriously. It wasn't like, and this is not to denigrate like Right On or Yo or Fresh or Spice or any of the hip hop publications that I grew up reading, but that was more like, okay, you would get like a picture of like Heavy D, and then what's his birthday, like is he like what's his zodiac sign, like what's his favorite food. It wasn't like politics or the challenging politics. The fact of the matter is that even as controversial as Ice Cube is on Twitter, talking about the election, that would not have happened if not for publications like The Source and Spin Magazine and people like, at the Village Voice, like whether it was Greg Tate or Nelson George at first, or Bones Malone, or, really like the founders of The Source and people like Reggie Dennis and James Bernard, like really getting hard into the politics. And like, Ice Cube says something on a record and then you talk to him about it, you challenge him about it. And there's a lot of back and forth. And then, that was the thing, was it just was an incredible publication, and it made me want to write. And so at the same time, that there's the Source and Rap Pages and Herb Magazine. These were all places that I eventually wrote for. And it just became a passion of mine. And it still is. I mean, to this day. And a lot of people that I know that's where we all met, was either in hip hop journalism, in the hip hop scene of the 90s. And a lot of us are even as filmmakers, whether it's myself or Mimi Valdez or Sasha Jenkins, like it's still a passion of ours.
And Selwyn Hines.
Yeah, Selwyn. I mean, there's so many people from my generation of writer that are now doing it. Like, forgive me if I forget names, because it's just, I mean, Carlito, Rodriguez. I mean, like, we all know each other,
Reggie, rest in peace to Reggie. Yeah. So what got you to start working at LA Times? What was your interest in working at LA Times? Because I remember they weren't always, highlighting hip hop.
I got really lucky because I graduated from Stanford in '94. Mm-hmm. I was working at the San Francisco Bay Guardian. I would do pieces here and there. And then there was an opening at the Times. At the time, there was a writer, Dennis Hunt, who I think they were being taken over by a bigger company. And Dennis Hunt decided not to continue with the publication. And they needed a young writer that understood hip hop, because Bob Hilburn, who was the kind of main person at the LA Times and on the music side for like 30 some years. He liked hip hop, but he wasn't going to try to say that he knew anything about it. And so I was lucky to get on. And that was the thing, was that kind of became my beat, writing about hip hop in LA between 94 and 97. And okay, so that's like right in the heart of Biggie, Tupac, right. East Coast versus West Coast. A lot of those concerts, it was kind of the golden age. I really lucked out. And it's really interesting because back then, Hilburn was known for being the writer that broke Elton John, that when Elton John was at the Troubadour, he was the writer that wrote about that and made Elton John a superstar. And so for me, I knew that having interviewed Biggie Smalls, like, that was important. I knew that what people like myself and P. Frank Williams were writing about, we knew it was important, but we didn't know that a lot of the people that we were, writing about would be as legendary as they are now. Because now people get that look in their eyes of awe when I talk about hanging out with Biggie, the same way that, like, when I would meet friends of my uncle who like knew Miles Davis, or people that like got to see Bob Marley in concert. It's right. Kind of, the same kind of thing. So I never take any of it for granted, Yeah,
they, even being a journalist, being a hip hop journalist during that time, especially during that time, they had to been a powerful experience, period, especially for the reasons that you said, of it being, Biggie, Pop, Dre, all of them during that time, down south starting to come up with a higher rising of their presence in hip hop. So it had to have been a busy time for all magazines. And you're also definitely heavily known for writing for The Source and XXL and Vibe. And which one was your most powerful experience, as far as not the amount of writing that you did, but what was the most fulfilling? Like, which one out of the three did you have? Which one did you have the most stretch with in order to write how you wanted to write? Not just what you wanted to write, but how you wanted to write. What was the easiest one? Which one gave you the most amount of respect out of the three magazines?
You also have to include Rap Pages in that as well, because, shout out to Sheena Lester for giving me, the opportunity for putting on a young college student and giving me the opportunity to hop on a plane, skip classes, hop on a plane and go to Orlando to hang out with Magic Mike. Like, my life was kind of like the hip hop version of Almost Famous. Like, a lot of people didn't know that they were sending records to my dorm, and, figured that I was like, probably grown, like living in somewhere in the Bay Area. They didn't think I was living in a dorm, skipping classes to go hang out. Like, it was, right. But so to answer that question, I loved writing for all of them for different reasons. Like, to me, The Source in some ways was my biggest emotional attachment, just in terms of, it was just a crazy time, because the thing about the original Source Mind Squad was that you didn't have to go out and search for a story, it would literally come down to Lower Broadway and walk right in the office. Like I used to call the source to, get put on hold because the receptionist at the time was dating Large Professor. And so like you would hear like tracks that he just finished the night before, just on the answering machine. Or like the music that they would have, like I don't know if people even understand what being put on hold is. It's like, but that's what it was. You call, you get put on hold, and then you would hear like a song, like they like Troy, like they reminisce over you, and then 3 months later, it's all you hear on the radio. And you're like, wait a minute, I heard that song before. That's when I heard it. So people would come like right out of the studio, right out of Green Street, right out of Chungking House of Metal, right out of D&D. With records that they recorded the night before and just play them in the office. Maddie C, who was one of, who wrote the Unsigned Hype column. I mean, he was really, in a way, kind of the person that found Biggie and played that tape or a copy of the tape that Biggie sent him, ultimately got to Puff, through Mr. C. So it was that kind of place where so many different people were getting on, and you could just it was like the between just hanging out there and just like a place that was pure hip hop where records, you would listen to stuff and you're just hanging out with like Reggie and James and Maddie C and Chris Wilder and Dream Hampton and Kieran Mayo and Minya O and like just so many of us just as pure hip hop fans just sitting and just talking about the music all the time. And then you'd have the West Coast experience with Rap Pages, because between Bilal and Brian Cross, the photographer, and Sheena and Kwanzaa and so many people that were plugged into like the Good Life and in the West Coast scene, that's the early days of the Far Side Freestyle Fellowship. It's funny because probably the first time I even met Ava DuVernay was when she was an MC, because she was an MC as part of a group at the Good Life. I mean, that was the thing. It was a kind of scene. You had these simultaneous scenes of hip hop on the East Coast and the West Coast, and the magazines to a certain extent were kind of offshoots of all of it, and you were just around it all the time. Vibe was kind of more like the grown-up publication because, of course, they had the money at first. It was really corporate. And so that was kind of our first introduction to what that was like. But
was that a good experience for you working with Vibe?
It was good. It was different. It wasn't that it wasn't good. It was good from the standpoint of you really got to see people empowered. I got to see, Danielle Smith go from being a columnist at the Bay Guardian to now being the editor-in-chief of Vibe, or watching as Mimi Valdez like literally started off as the assistant to the previous editor-in-chief and went all the way to eventually being editor-in-chief. It was where a lot of us learned how to do what it is we do. That's the thing I think about all three publications. And of course, you also can't forget Ego Trip.
Yes.
Like so much of what formulated us as writers, producers, directors now started for these publications. Also the Bomb Hip Hop magazine. That's where I got my real start, was the Bomb. David Paul being in the Bay and just his connections and just getting the opportunity to talk to people and write about it. I mean, it's a trip, because even like on Instagram, I think today is the 29th birthday of A Wolf in Sheep's Clothing, the Black Sheep record. But I remember that record coming out like yesterday. And that's kind of the weirdest part. I mean, Dante Ross and I have been talking about this for something that we're working on about his life, a fictionalized version of his life. But we're in this weird place where it's like you're young and old at the same time. I'm 47 years old. I'll be 48 in December. But then at the same time, I don't feel like I'm older than 25. And so I'll forget that half the shit I'm talking about to my kids, they're like, it's so old. It's, I might as well be talking about Ragtime and Louis Armstrong, And so like my daughter, like she loves old school hip hop, and she loves kind of keeping up with stuff. Whereas, the twins, like I've got two also 15-year-old twin boys, Jomo and Jahi. Like Jomo loves just fighting with me about music. Like, you know, he's all like, we'll have these arguments about like new hip hop and why be in the mirror versus, you know, yoga, like all these basically like, that's the problem when we're getting old. It's half the time a record will drop, and just by reading the name, I don't know what it sounds like. Because it used to be I could literally like read a name and I hear the song in my head. Yep. And now, like, you know, 21 Savage drops a record, and I got the new record. I like the new record, but it isn't like I immediately see it and I'm like, okay, it's this song. Or to me, like a perfect example is Benny the Butcher's record.
Who?
Benny the Butcher.
Oh,
like he's kind of like a throwback. He kind of made like it's a real New York record. And the thing that's interesting about it is that he's reminiscent of Ghostface. He's reminiscent of like Raekwon of that whole era of MC, but doing it in a new way. And so what happens is that like that to me is like when Wynton Marsalis will make a record in the style of Miles Davis. You know, hip hop has gotten to a place where it connects with jazz in the sense that people make records in the old way in new ways. But then at the same time, there's some new shit that's just completely out there that I am not struggling to understand, but generationally, I just have to be like, okay, I need to learn this. And so it's definitely a young person's game, you know?
Yeah, well, hip hop connected to jazz from day one, though. So like, that's part of how hip hop was even originated, was through beats and sound and horns. So, you know, we had to make sure that we always, you know, give honor to jazz when we give honor to hip hop. And we honor hip hop, we have to make sure we always, first and foremost, give honor to jazz, because in a way they go hand in hand.
No doubt.
Do you miss the heavy aspects of journalism, and not just journalism, like hip hop journalism? Do you miss being in the forefront of that? Do you miss being one of the main journalists? One of the names that people always say all the time when they used to pick up Double XL and Source and Vibe and Rap Pages and all of those.
I wouldn't say I miss it. I would just say that what I do is kind of an extension of that. Like I'm able to still, I mean, that's one of the reasons why there's a picture of the Notorious B.I.G. in Cottonmouth's office.
Of course.
Because that was my homage to a man who changed my life just by virtue of knowing him and writing about him.
Did you get to keep that picture?
What?
Did you get to keep that picture, or was it yours?
It's, man, as soon as we got canceled, I called New York to find out what happened to it, and you know, it's hanging around in somebody's office somewhere. You know, I mean, who knows who had it? Because you know, the problem is that was, you know, that set. I think honestly, had I known we were going to get canceled for season 3, there are a lot of props. Well, I wouldn't have had to spend money buying stuff back, like those, you know, some of those lukecage hoodies that in that auction. Like, you know what I'm saying? That was kind of frustrating. Like having to actually like pay money.
Wow.
But that was the thing. Was for me, it was important that it just not end up on somebody's shelf. And so pre-COVID, the last time I was in DC was I got to go with my daughter and go to the African American Museum and donate one of the lukecage hoodies to something that they're going to do there in Afrofuturism. I mean, even this last auction that the Sotheby's had with all these hip hop artifacts. I mean, people don't understand. They've got history in their closets. You know, they're just laying around. And so like like the crown that Biggie wore in that photo that Baron Claiborne shot, I think that I watched the auction. I mean, the crown sold for like, I think $500,000.
Yeah, I saw that. And wasn't it plastic?
Yeah, I mean, it was like literally like one of those like Burger King type, like, you know, a Burger King thing is.
Yeah, I saw that.
I mean, it was one step up from that, like probably like a $5-10 plastic crown, you know. But that was the thing was, you know, when Dream Hampton was the editor in chief of Rap Pages, she commissioned that photo shoot. And with that, photo shoot, that cover, that's when that's what Baron shot it for. And then it was really a whole photo shoot that Baron had. Baron has so many incredible photos. Some of those last photos of Biggie. Mm-hmm. And then ultimately what happened for Luke Cage was we had the script. I was working on the first episode, and we got to the point where we needed, I had originally written about, in Cottonmouth's speech, about, where does your eye go, the crown? You want to know why? Because everybody wants to be the king. I had that dialogue. And initially, he was going to be referring to this painting called Charles I. Charles I is a Basquiat painting. And if you look at the painting, the crown in that painting is really small. It's kind of in the upper left-hand corner, I think.
Yeah, I'm a huge Basquiat fan.
And that was the thing, was that I wrote Cottonmouth's speech around that. Mm-hmm. But then we couldn't get the painting cleared. And so I didn't want to lose that moment, because I knew that moment, I didn't know how important that moment was going to be. I didn't know, Mahershala hadn't been cast yet. I didn't know that Mahershala was just going to take it to a whole nother level. But I knew that I did not want to lose that crown part of that speech. And so we're scrambling, and I'm thinking, okay, what painting or photo has a crown that's really prominent? And then I thought immediately back to that Rap Pages cover. And luckily we were able to contact Baron, and Baron agreed to let us use a different outtake from that. And that became the image that we had in Cottonmouth's office.
Yeah, when he backed up and walked into the crown, basically.
Yeah.
That was a very powerful. It was actually one of the most memorable scenes out of both seasons by far. So it was good that you all directed him to do that, to morph into Biggie as he was walking past.
But even that was kind of like what you call a happy accident, because I wasn't on set. I was on set. I had to leave set because some silly argument I had to have with Marvel West Coast calling me New York. So I got to go upstairs. Okay. That's kind of the life of a showrunner. Like, you're pulled in all these different directions. Mm-hmm. So I had to kind of go upstairs and put out a fire and argue with somebody. And at the same time, as soon as I get back to set, the director and the cinematographer are like, "Oh man, we got this shot with Mahershala that I can't wait till you see it." So then I see it. I'm like, I missed it. But the beauty of just being able to create, that space where pure hip hop could exist, even within the confines of Marvel. Mm-hmm. That goes back to your question about, like, do I miss being a hip hop journalist? I don't miss that, but the confidence and what I learned from that helped me every day as a showrunner. Because really the most important thing you learn from journalism is to not be starstruck or intimidated. So, like, I'm working with Regina King, I'm working with Mahershala Ali, I'm working with Michael Cudlitz, or all these different people, like Ben McKenzie. And, at first you're like nervous, but I'm like, okay, well, I used to be a journalist. I can relax my face, even no matter how freaked out I am, I can just be like anybody else. And then having the ability to ask questions, because that's really all actors do, is they have questions. And you have to be able to answer those questions in a way that makes sense to them. And then at the same time, if you don't know what you're talking about, you just have to just act like you know what you're talking about until you do or you don't. Mahershala would always have a lot of questions about Cottonmouth's background. And I couldn't say to Mahershala, I don't know. I just, I would be like, okay, well, the reason that he plays the piano is because he always wanted to be a musician. And then after we get off set, I'm like, oh, shit, like I got to figure out exactly how to make it fit. But, that's what kind of separates the Mahershala Ali's and the Regina Kings of the world, is that they think about every single aspect of character. And your job as a writer, your job as a showrunner, is to not only answer those questions, but it has to make sense. And that's really what the job is just making everything make sense.
Did you created Cottonmouth, or did David Walker create? Did you create Cottonmouth?
No, Cottonmouth is a character that's existed, in Luke Cage.
I thought it was a newer character. I thought that it came out of David's series for Luke Cage.
No, I mean, but even when David was playing with the classic characters that came
right.
from the initial run of the comic book.
Mm-hmm.
I remember like the first thing that happened when I got to Marvel is as soon as you sign away the your life in terms of the
sign away your life.
well, like just in terms of like not what you call it confidentiality.
Right.
So what happens is that you get that, and then they gave me before they came out, way before they got filmed, I got to read the first 2 scripts of Daredevil, and I got to read the first 2 scripts for Jessica Jones. And those scripts are so good. I was intimidated. I was like, oh man, this is a mistake. I fucked up. Because, no matter how many times you write, you always feel this is the script that's going to break me. This is the script that's going to prove that I have no idea what I'm doing. And I realized soon after that was, wait a minute, Daredevil has Kingpin. He has an iconic villain that he fights against. Jessica Jones has Kilgrave, or AKA the Purple Man, like who she fights against. Luke Cage, if you read the comic book, like every week it was somebody different. It was Chemistro one week. It was, Piranha Jones. Or who's different than Piranha. They're all these different villains. And so, but then to me, I realized very quickly that the advantage was, wait a minute, because people don't really, unless they're hardcore comic fans, don't necessarily know the characters. Mm-hmm. It gives you the opportunity to reinvent them in a way that makes sense for the new universe that you're trying to create. So, Mariah from the comics basically goes from being Aunt Jemima with a knife to now being the corrupt politician. Cottonmouth always kind of owned the club, but he was older. And at first, casting wise, we went in an older direction until ultimately we were lucky enough to get Mahershala. And you just kind of try to find ways to be true to the comic, but then at the same time expand, what that vision is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Sean Antoine II, who's a filmmaker, shout out to Sean. He asked, was Mariah from Luke Cage based off of Inez Dickens in Harlem?
I wouldn't say that as much as, Harlem is like Washington, D.C. meets Vegas. You've got both entertainers, politicians, street politics, and Washington politics all in one place. And so it gives you like a lot of ways to kind of like build on that. So I wouldn't say that Mariah was based on any one person. I kind of wanted her to have the feel of Madam Queen. Because there was Stephanie St. Clair.
That's right.
For many years, ran the numbers game.
That's right.
In Harlem, and she was kind of, and Bumpy Johnson was her protege.
Yeah.
And so kind of having them kind of play off of each other. So in a way, like, she was definitely kind of an influence. And then, Bumpy was a definite influence. Bumpy, Frank Lucas, Nikki, they were all kind of a combination of Cottonmouth, but with musical talent.
Yeah. Did you have, if the show ended up having a season 3, were you going to like incorporate Malcolm X or Bumpy Johnson or any of the other people that are in quote unquote crime, because I have a different viewpoint on the word crime, but the people that were in crime in the city of New York, were you going to incorporate them somehow into the show, even though it was modern time?
Well, the only thing I can reveal about season 3, because that is one of the things where I am looking over my shoulder for the Marvel sniper somewhere. What I can reveal is this: a lot of people were thrown off by Luke Cage, suddenly now being like the sheriff of Harlem and the exact perch that Cottonmouth had. But that was the thing. The thing was, season 3 was all about Luke was going to find out, can you run Harlem from a barbershop? Meaning, do you have to be in this club with all the temptations that come with running this club and being the man? Or do you have to be a gangster in order to run the city? Mm-hmm. Or can you do the same thing on a grassroots level from the barbershop? So the entire arc about season 3 really was about how do how does Luke ultimately go back to being himself in the barbershop? And what are some of the trials and tribulations he was gonna, get into? Because even with that finale, like Mike Coulter was supposed to play it different. The way I had written it, it was like Mike was supposed to kind of stand there and be reluctant about, you got Rakim, rapping about him. He's standing right where Cottonmouth stood. And there was supposed to kind of be like, okay, in order to save Harlem, he was going to live up to what he told, Misty, the Incredible Small Mystic, of I'm going, now I can see things, from the top. But what Mike did was amazing, actually, because what Mike did was he flipped it. Was instead of playing reluctant, he played it like he's loving it, and he made you afraid of what Luke was going to do. Mm-hmm. And so as a result, it became like, okay, when DW's in the barbershop and calls Luke Trump, all of a sudden you're like, okay, oh man, is this going to be the direction that Luke goes? Like, I really wish we had gotten that season 3, because it wasn't. Here's the thing, and I can get into this a little bit without, because hell, everyone that would be angry about it's no longer at Marvel, so fuck it. Mm-hmm. The thing was, it was never any kind of like, I think in the press somebody said it was creative differences. That wasn't what happened. What happened ultimately, it was really Netflix versus Marvel, or Disney versus Netflix in terms of, control of Marvel stuff being, now with a competing service because of Disney Plus. And so it was an environment that you could talk to anybody on the record, either company, they were going to say, in this present environment, it wasn't going to work. Continuing. But story-wise, we got far. Like we got 7 scripts in. Like we were all ready to film that season. And the first episode of season 3, honestly, is one of my favorite things that I've ever written, because it was a different Luke, and it was interesting with him trying to just kind of balance everything out. And I think that it would have been a really good season. I think it would have been the kind of season that would have come full circle and would have answered some of the questions that a lot of people had about season 2.
Well, one thing for season 2, something that I appreciated, and my brother Greg Ellisay of It's Not a Weird Spider and Jason Reed, like what we did appreciate about season 2 was you incorporating African spirituality, because that's very important to us 3 individually, is when creators add authenticity into African spirituality, don't turn it demonic or ignorant or turn it into something that makes everything bad. So we appreciate that. The Haitian accents were a little rough. I'm be real.
The Megan accents. I mean,
they were a little rough, but
honestly, I want to apologize for a lot of that, and a lot of people came at me hot on Twitter.
Apologize.
But here's the thing. The thing is, anybody knows me that like people came at me, and then honestly, I literally got in these conversations where like I would end up calling them, and they were like, I was calling people in Jamaica. They were like, yeah, I said this, but I didn't expect you to actually call me, and I called them, and I explained what happened. What happens, unfortunately, with a show, is that the difference between doing the show where it airs on regular television, where you have an episode and you're filming at the same time that you're showing episodes, is that if you get something wrong, you can make adjustments in between. The problem is that if you make a mistake in episode 1 or 2, and you'll continue that mistake because they're all going to drop at the same time. So you got to live with it. And the biggest problem was that in the first, because you notice what happens with the accents. The first episode, we kind of went deep into it, and then the problem was that there were executives that were saying, this is really on the Netflix side. I'm not going to call anybody in particular, but they were saying like, we didn't really understand what he was saying, and so the problem was that we lighten the accent. But the problem in doing that is you kind of made this hybrid that didn't exist, because it isn't like, Wakanda, where like even though it's a real South African language of Xhosa, like, they never said they were from South Africa. So, we're all going to forgive Forrest Whitaker for some of the things that he did in service of character.
Yeah, but he made up for it on Godfather Harlem.
But the thing is that because Jamaican culture and Jamaica as an island, the politics is a real place, that you have to be absolutely as authentic and as real as possible with that. And like, if I could do it all over again, I would have pushed harder to say, you know what, I don't care if you don't really understand it. We're not going to hybridize or do anything else. We really are going to push more for the authenticity, as I've always fought for in the music. We actually shot episode 11 in Kingston. And so the thing is that, like, I really would have loved the opportunity, to work with more Jamaican actors. And then people will say, well, there's all these Jamaican actors in New York. And the thing is that you have to go through so many different approvals. The problem a lot of the times is that you'll get actors who, yes, they are Jamaican, but they grew up, in Brooklyn, or they grew up in Toronto. And even just by virtue of growing up, in the States or in Canada, their accents are changing, and all these different things happen. I mean, I think if anything comes out of this, I'm really hoping that that there are more opportunities for Jamaican actors to show the importance of preserving the authenticity of the accents. And so, like, it was really great to see, like, Top Boy, filmed in Jamaica, or even something like Idris Elba did with Yardi, like, filming a lot of things in Jamaica, but then at the same time, for a reason, British actors can do any accent, and there are so many British Jamaicans that were able to also come with a certain authenticity. I mean, I think that's the thing. I mean, I think it's like, I was so focused on trying to get the history right in terms of Nanny and the Maroons, and mentioning things in Jamaican politics that hadn't really been mentioned in an American show. Sometimes you miss the forest for the trees. And I was so focused on trying to get the history and doing different things with Bushmaster that the accents is where I lost. And so that's the thing is that I tend to, rather than be obsessed with a mistake, I get obsessed with trying to correct it, in terms of trying to learn, if I have the situation again, how can I do better? And,
are you going to work with him again? Because he was pissed when the show got canceled. Shit, I wanted to give him a hug. The actor that played Bushmaster. Are you?
You talking about Mustafa? Yeah, I love Mustafa. He's really a good actor. I mean, honestly, like everybody, whether it was Mike, whether it was Simone, Mustafa, Theo, Mahershala, Alfred,
shout out to Alfred Woodard, Rosario,
like, Gabrielle, Frank. I mean, everybody. Like, what happens sometimes with a cast is that, anytime you see anybody, there's tension, or somebody didn't like somebody. The Luke Cage cast is truly a family. Ron Stevens Jones, like, we all still occasionally talk with each other, and anytime we have the opportunity to, like, unite, it's always a blast. We're always happy to see each other. It's also the same with the writing staff. It was a family in many ways, and still is. And so I'm actually happy that everybody's working, and that everybody's, like, still doing their thing. And so it's like, but I've been lucky to really be on shows where that the atmosphere is more like that than not. Same with Southland. Like, every single time Regina has won an Oscar, or won, or when she wins an Emmy, like, we all, either whether it's the Southland group text or just talking to her, like, individually, saying congratulations. It's like her victory. We're just proud, Same thing with Mahershala winning those Oscars.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then at the same time, it's just like, you know, Mike doing really well with Evil, and then Simone doing great with All In. I mean, it's just everybody's happy for everybody, which is really cool.
And what about Creed? You were the screenwriter for Creed, correct?
I got story by credit, which means that
explain that to me, because I was confused about that.
Okay, so in every boxing match, there's a winner, there's a loser. I lost. You know, I was one of the people that lost the battle for ultimately for screenplay credit. So the consolation is story by, but I'm still proud of that because you know, the structure that I provided, and you know, a lot of the stuff that you know, happened with the script, like I was still a part of that. So you know, it's not the credit that I would have really wanted ultimately, you know, but I was happy to still be a part of it. Like, you know, it happens a lot of movies. Like sometimes you'll get full credit, sometimes you won't. Like I
write a lot of it though.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, here's the thing: was like I wrote the original, you know, story, you know, for Creed 2, like to get the gig. You know, I wrote an extensive outline, and then what happened was there was a period of time when they didn't know if Stallone was going to come back. So I wrote a draft where Rocky died, and it was really the true sequel to Creed 2. I mean, you know, sorry, Creed 2 was a true sequel from the standpoint of, you know, there is no Rocky now. You know, the kid Adonis is on his own. So I wrote that draft. Simultaneously, the studio also hired my friend Sasha Penn to write a draft where Rocky's alive. So we both wrote our drafts, and Stallone came back. Stallone, even though I technically killed him in my draft, he dug what I wrote. And so then Stallone and I wrote a number of drafts because he was going to direct. And so he and I collaborated on 3 or 4 different drafts of Creed 2. And Stallone
was the original director, right before they hired Steven.
Yeah, and Stallone right up until almost the end was going to direct, and that's when he decided not to direct anymore, and that's when Jewel Taylor came in with Stephen Capel, and of course, you know, Jewel made changes, and in making those changes, I mean, that's the thing. It's like he definitely deserves his screenplay by credit because it really is his screenplay. But he was working from some of the clay that I and Stallone created, and ultimately, when it all turned out, he and Stallone ended up sharing credit, and I got a story by credit. But I'm still proud of that movie, and I'm still proud of the opportunity that I had to work on it. And you know, the thing was you know, Stallone is an interesting cat because
to say the least,
it was wild writing with him because you would write stuff and then, like, he's just talking normal on the phone. All of a sudden, he would like put the Rocky voice on. You were like, it would be like, holy shit! And then he's like, Rocky, like you're talking to Rocky Balboa, and he goes, it's. Some people say like, okay, well, yeah, Stallone, like, of course, he's been doing that character, but he has that character down to syntax, to the way he talks, the rhythm of how Rocky talks is different than Stallone's actual speech. I mean, it was a trip, like,
really?
You know, to work like that. And honestly, as a fan, I mean, you know, I'm still a fan.
So let's talk about. I'm gonna save that one for last. Let's talk about Ray Donovan. Let's talk about Ray Donovan. Ray Donovan, of course, is it still on, or did it end?
It finally ended.
So what was it? 4 seasons?
I think it was 7.
Shit, I'm late. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I was only a part of it for 1.5. The reason I say 1.5 is that
the first season, though.
No, season 2. Season 2, I was a co-executive producer. Season 1, Ann Bitterman created the show. At the time, I was on NCIS LA, so I wasn't available to come on season 1. But the thing that was interesting with Ann, some people don't know this, Ann created the show Southland, and Southland was the first television show I ever wrote for. And Ann and I became really tight. And so when she was creating Ray Donovan, You know, even though she started that room and was working on that show, we would talk all the time. And so I was what I would call, I was a part of Anne's kitchen cabinet, you know, basically, you know, stories, plot, stuff that she was running. She'd be like, hey, what do you think of this? And like, so it was kind of like being a part of the room without being a part of the room. But the one thing, my one contribution to season 1 was that she said, okay, she revealed to me the secret of season 1, that there was going to be this moment when Ray was going to reveal that he was ultimately molested by, you know, a priest. And that's where his angst and all that other stuff comes from. And she was saying, like, she said to me, she said, like, you know, what's a moment? Because you and Liev are the same age, essentially. I mean, Liev is maybe a couple years older than I am. But like, what is a moment from that time that a kid from Boston would, you know, never forget? Like, is there a moment in the history or sports that someone from Boston just would never forget? Because that moment will be the moment that happened, you know, the night before Ray got, you know, molested. And so I said to Ann, I said, Bucky fucking Dent. And she said, what? And so I told her about the Yankees and the Red Sox and just, you know, the depth of that history and how, you know, and that one game where, you know, the Red Sox thought they were going to win. They thought they were finally going to rid themselves of the curse of the Bambino. And then Bucky Dent comes in and just saves them and saves the Yankees. And then forever in Boston, he's forever known as Bucky fucking Dent. And so Anne loved that story and then incorporated it into all of the different things that they had plotted into, you know, that first season. And so I'm not saying that I was a part of the actual plotting. I'm just saying, like, I just told her about, you know, that sports, that little bit of history. And so when it came time to bring me on for season 2, that was one of the things that she was telling Showtime. Well, yeah, like I know, you know, I know Cheo probably wouldn't necessarily be like the candidate you would think. Why are you bringing him into season 2? But she's like, yo, he alerted me to that Bucky fucking Dent story. And, you know, and I was lucky enough to come on.
So as far as Ray Donovan, did you work on any separate episodes? Did you get to guest write any episodes after the season that you completely wrote?
Well, so in season 2 was when I officially came on the writing staff. And so that writing staff with myself, you know, David Hollander, Anne, Michael Tolkien, Ron Najwaner, and Brett Johnson. You know, the thing about that staff, that was probably one of the best staffs I had ever been in. And I think really that staff, because that was a room that was just like, I mean, we talking about heavy hitters. It was a room where I learned so much, so many lessons that I ultimately carried over into, you know, within a year after running my own show, running Lukecage. Just in terms of, like, that was kind of the finishing school, not just in terms of dialogue. I learned how to write dialogue on Southland, but really character and really character motivations. Every single episode of Ray Donovan is a deep study in character and why somebody does something. And so just learning, like, you know, how to always gauge the emotional temperature of every single scene and just the upper level of acting and just all the different nuances, just being able to watch, you know, being on set, the combination of all of us, you know, doing a lot of story stuff. We all contributed to every single episode. So even the episodes that we have credited names, like, we would, you know, contribute things, all of us, each of, you know, in each part. So it's not like it's all individual. I got credited on one episode, you know, the episode Sunny, which is episode 8, which is the episode that, you know, that, you know, Cookie, my friend, Omar Dorsey, who played Cookie Brown. That was the episode where he, you know, I'm spoiling it, but it's still, you know, when he kills Marvin Gaye Washington. And of course, there are a lot of episodes.
That's one of the more known episodes, though.
Yeah, there are a lot of episodes where Cookie would appear, and I would write a lot of the Cookie stuff in different episodes. But I mean, that was the thing, was like, but I also wrote stuff that Ray said, because being from the East Coast, growing up near Boston, it's like, you know, I was exposed to, Irish American culture as much as I was Italian American culture. And so like there's this one line, I think it was episode 4 when Ray is about to take out an informant and he says, like, what do you learn when you're 6 years old on Dorchester Street? You don't talk to the fucking cops. That was just one of my lines that I threw, because we would all sit around and talk story, and then you all kind of contribute to everybody's episode.
So what about Southland, since we started talking about Anne and you said you were working with her, you first worked with her during Southland. So for people who lived in the cloud and have never seen Southland was a shit, by the way. But for people who don't know what Southland, give a brief summary of Southland and let them know what it stands for, because I don't even think people realize that.
All right. Well, Southland, is a show about the LAPD. And if you live in Los Angeles, they call the entire area of Los Angeles, the Southland. Being Southern California versus Northern California, because California is a huge state. Now, the thing about this show was it was a different cop show than almost any show that had ever come before it or after it. It's really about the only cop show that I really can say I would put neck and neck with The Wire or Homicide in terms of being greater than the sum of its parts, because it was and that was really what helped me get on the show in the first place. Was when Anne first wrote the show and it first came on NBC, she was trying to do something different. She really wanted a show that really spoke to the experiences of homicide detectives. Regina King was a homicide detective on that show, but then at the same time also spoke to the emotional experience of gang detectives and then patrol cops, and having the audience understand how all three are different and getting the emotional perspective of all three. But then at the same time with the action and the scenarios being real, like literally not like Law and Order getting some, Juilliard graduate, real, but like in some cases people 5 seconds, out the bang on camera real. Like that's really what she was trying to go for. And so the show takes off, and then she's looking for samples when they realize they were going to pick it up for season 2. And she's trying to find different writers. And everybody, at that point was writing spec scripts. So they would have like a spec practice or a spec Law and Order. And it was not at all the flavor she wanted. And for me, the reason I got lucky was because I was coming off of the movie Notorious. But it was a sample that I'd written. It was a script that I wrote for Antoine Fuqua called Green Light, which basically was a script that was really set heavily in the gang world, and was a song. It was a script about a rapper who writes a song about a real crime, and then as a result, the streets and the cops are pissed at him, and he's just trying to basically make it out alive. But there was something about that script that she really liked. She and I really got along. And I was lucky enough to be asked to be on that staff. I came in as an executive story editor. And, I just remember the first day in that room. I mean, it was crazy because it's like you're in this room, you've got John Wells on at one end of the table, John Wells, ER, West Wing, all those shows. You had his director and really best friend, Chris Chulak, at the other end of the table. There's Anne. There is Robin Green and Mitch Burgess, who won all these Emmys on The Sopranos. And then at the same time, were about to create the show Blue Bloods. You had David Graziano. You had Diana Sohn. I mean, people that had all had a lot more experience than myself or the other brother in the room, Nathan Jackson, who, and I remember that first day saying how did I even get here? Why am I here? And then I realized, wait a minute, nobody else in that room had ever been, in Compton with the game. No one else in that room has had the experience of
reality
of hanging out with somebody, and they have the AK-47 on the ottoman, and then the helicopter is around the corner. And I'm realizing that it's like the reason I'm here is that I've both been in cars that have been pulled over, and then at the same time had the recent experience of going on ride-alongs with cops. And so it would give me the opportunity and the perspective to show what both sides were like. And also being a journalist, I mean, I overcompensated because, the stuff that they didn't want to do, I was enthusiastic to do. And that was ultimately how I got my first script, was because they were going to have a cop boot camp for the actors. And all the writers were like, I'm not going to that shit. I don't want to get up at 5:30. I don't want to do that. And me being nervous about writing for actors for the first time and being like nervous, right. I said, I have to go do that. And so I did. And not only did I really get to meet, Mike Cudlitz and Ben McKenzie and C. Thomas Howell and Regina and, everybody for the first time, I also got to meet a lot of cops. And then one of the cops, Mario Cortez, told me the story that became the episode, What Makes Sammy Run. And then that episode is really what got me started on everything.
Okay. Because with Southland, it ended up moving network on it started on Hulu.
No, actually, Southland started on NBC. We got canceled before any episodes of season 2 ever aired. And then there was about 6 months. The crazy thing about it was within that 6 months, I got hired to write on the first season of Walking Dead. And I basically was the Jackie Robinson of Walking Dead. And I was in the middle of writing the 3rd episode of season 1 when I got pulled off of Walking Dead back to Southland when I got picked up on a new network, because they still had an option on my contract. Mm-hmm. And so season 2 ended up airing on TNT, and that's where the show stayed for season 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then I was on staff for season 2, season 3, and season 4.
Yeah, my phone going off too. So we can speak about Notorious. Let's talk about your book first, because I feel like the book should be focused on far more than the movie. So let's talk about the book. What made you want to write a book about him specifically? Because you being a hip hop journalist for so many years, what made you decide out of all the people, I want to make a huge and powerful book about Biggie?
I was just lucky enough to meet him early. A lot of people, that was the thing, was Biggie, like when he was on 226 St. James in Brooklyn, the crazy thing about it was that he was in Brooklyn at a time where like he lived around the corner from so many journalists, whether it was like Dream Hampton or Bones Malone or, or Matty C or like any number of people. Like they used to see Biggie like selling weed and hanging out by the train station way before he was ever like known as an MC. And so then once he was an MC, because he was such a compelling person, you love to write about him because he was just an incredible interview. And he was also just a really, not just a nice guy, but he was smart. And I was lucky enough to talk to him. I actually interviewed him on his block. I interviewed him on his block on St. James. I want to say 2 weeks after Ready to Die came out. And then I was ultimately the last person to talk to him. I talked to him a day before he was murdered. And it was those last conversations and being around him that last month of his life that really made me want to write a book. Because at the time, the narrative was, okay, East versus West. He writes about being a gangster. He gets killed like a gangster. And that wasn't who he was. I mean, Christopher Wallace was way different than the character of the Notorious B.I.G. And that was the main thing that I wanted to do, was that I wanted to humanize him. I want, like, those last interviews that I had, when he talked about wanting to give Tiana away at her wedding and wanting to be around to see his son, just born CJ, grow up and be around. His whole dream, honestly, was he wanted to be a soccer dad. Like, that's really what he wanted to do. He wanted to have this corny life in Atlanta or wherever. It was not the life of the records that he made.
Right.
And so when he talked about life after death, he meant like, okay, I'm killing off the old Notorious B.I.G. and I now have a new life of being somebody different. And that was what that meant. It wasn't like, okay, I know I'm going to die. And even though I have a song, you're nobody till somebody kills you. Like that wasn't his intention. He never really cheated death in the way that even somebody like Tupac did. from this. And wait, let me before that gets controversial. What I mean by that is that
people pay attention to your every word.
Tupac loved to talk about the ironies and the danger of his life. Mm-hmm. Almost, I wouldn't say he was taunting death, but I would say that Pac definitely, he was fatalistic. Mm-hmm. And you talk to people around Pac, and he was just becoming less fatalistic when shit caught up with him. And that, basically just because of the situations that he found himself in that he couldn't extricate himself from. Big was different. Big, really, that wasn't really his speed. That wasn't really who he was. But the problem was that when both of them died, you had two separate books that came out that published their autopsy photos. You had the Kathy Scott book that the killing of it was the murder of Tupac that had his autopsy photo. Mm-hmm. You could halfway, from a journalistic standpoint, say, okay, because there were so many rumors that Tupac wasn't really dead, that there was a journalistic integrity in terms of publishing that photo. I mean, it's thin. You could halfway understand it, but it from an emotional standpoint, it wasn't really necessary. But when Randall Sullivan in his book had Biggie's autopsy photo, that was completely unnecessary because there was no disputing he was dead.
Well, a lot of what he did was unnecessary, but I don't feel like ranting on your interview. So
yeah, but that was really the thing, was that when they published Biggie's autopsy photo and Tupac's autopsy photo, it was kind of like what you see in these books about mobsters, like the Albert Anastasia hit, or when Paul Castellano gets killed in front of Sparks Steakhouse. Any book about mob history, and I'm obsessed with writing about the mob and reading about it. That's how they were treating these two guys. And my friend, my late friend John Singleton, rest in peace. I caught myself because to me, John is still I was close with him. It still feels like he's here. Mm-hmm. John had all these great stories about what Tupac was really like. And I knew a lot of people that knew Pac, including one of my best friends, Rob Marriott, had interviewed Pac right before he died. And the thing was that with the interviews that I had with Biggie, once I was given the opportunity to write that book, it was important for me that the book be as reflective of the entirety of him as much as I could, and talking to a lot of people around him. And it's something I'm still very proud of, that book.
Were you able to talk to Mrs. Wallace? Yes,
she was an important part of that book. And ultimately nobody would talk to me for the book, because the first question with anybody's, is Miss Wallace cool with this? Miss Wallace is great. She really is a good person, and at the same time, also just never stopped championing her son. Mm-hmm. They kind of, and she admitted that there were a lot of times they were at odds because she had a very different perspective of him, in terms of not being the, upstanding student that she had raised, and now entering the, persona of a gangster rapper. Mm-hmm. But in our heart, he was always Chrissy Poo, and so they also had a great relationship. And as he was getting older and as he became a father, a lot of the things that might have kept them apart really began to heal. And that was really the biggest tragedy of his murder, was that, because he and I talked about this, he was finally figuring out how to be the Notorious B.I.G. and Christopher Wallace. He finally figured out that he could be both. Mm-hmm. And right at the moment where he fully figured it out was when he was murdered, and I think that was the thing about his mom, is that she's always kept his legacy alive. And then with the help of Mark Pitts and Wayne Barrow, she's kept, his money alive, and so as a result, the kids have never wanted for anything, and his legacy has been protected. I think in a way that has, kept him very much, the legend that he is.
So how were you a part of the film exactly? So
the film, because of the book, I had the opportunity to write the first two drafts of the screenplay. Mm-hmm. And then Reggie Rock Bythewood rewrote me, and then we shared credit, on the screenplay. So the thing is on that one, the structure of the film is very, very reflective of my screenplay. But a lot of the moments, a lot of the dialogue are Reggie. But the thing was that I learned a lot from Reggie's rewrite, and also, you know, the few times I was on set, because when you're a writer and you have a film in production, you have to balance the drama of the script that you're trying to protect. You have to balance the wants of the director. You have to balance the wants of the studio. And that was an experience that I didn't have. And Reggie had that in spades because of his experience, not only with, you know, New York Undercover, but also because of, you know, working on films like Get on the Bus, and then also being a director of his own film like Biker Boys. So the difference between a production rewrite and a write and the kind of thing that I wrote, it's different. And I still love my screenplay, but at the same time was happy, you know, that a lot of elements of my screenplay stayed. And I really think it was really, you know, I was never mad about us sharing credit, because I really feel like, you know, we both really deserved, you know, credit, you know, shared credit for that screenplay.
So was that an enjoyable experience to see that film come into action? Like, were you satisfied with the outcome of the film, honestly, or did you feel like something should have been changed?
My feelings are that I was happy with the movie. I still am. I mean, you know, I feel like George Shulman did a great job, and George and I worked on, he directed the 11th episode of season 1 of Lukecage.
Oh, okay.
You know, so that's the thing. I mean, it's like, it was an opportunity. I think it's not really a beef. The only thing I have about that movie is that I really wish that it had had more support to just be more, I don't want to say less sanitized. What I'm saying is that that movie was able to create the lane that Straight Outta Compton, you know, later took to another level. And I kind of wish that, both from the standpoint, from a Fox Searchlight standpoint of support, as well as just the opportunity of saying, look, this movie, you don't have to worry about how it's going to appeal. Rather than making a movie that has to appeal to so many people, let the movie be what the movie it wants to be, and be like fully reflective of a Notorious B.I.G. record, the same way that Straight Outta Compton was fully reflective of the listening experience of that album and all those records. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, I think that because the movie was so successful, yeah, Straight Outta Compton gets a bigger budget and gets to live in that way. I really wish that that Notorious had that kind of support. But then again, I mean, you know, the movie did its thing. I mean, it was #1 when it came out. I still get checks, smaller each time, but still, you know, it did its thing, you know.
How you feel about All Eyes on Me?
That was frustrating. I mean, Benny Boom, I mean, I got love for the brother. I really do.
I'm trying to be nice right now because I don't know who you friends with.
Because I mean, I mean, Benny's a good brother, but scripts, that was one where it's probably my favorite. It's one of my favorite scripts. That script was not at all reflective, and ultimately what came out. And that movie was all over the place.
It was.
And, you know, it was also a movie that John Singleton, he also did a draft of. And then when he was going to direct it, he and I were going to collaborate on that one. But it was one of those things where it ultimately didn't happen. And after it kind of went away, you know, it was kind of frustrating what happened. But I don't have any animosity towards anybody. I just really feel like the biggest problems with the movie, it wasn't the direction. It was the script. Yeah,
it was a very interesting movie, to say the least. Yeah.
Yeah, but here's the thing. It's like that script and that movie, you know, all of us, I think even the people that ultimately got credit for the movie were frustrated. You know, those guys, those guys ended up going on to create the, you know, really a show that I love on Netflix. You know, on my block is their show. You know, Michael Starberry also did a draft of that screenplay. Michael, of course, was one of the writers on When They See Us, and is now running the Colin Kaepernick show for Ava DuVernay on Netflix. So, and then John had his experiences. Like we all have a kind of a crazy Morgan Creek experience on that screenplay. I'm sure if I caught up with him, David McKenna, who wrote Blow, I'm sure he has his own experience. But that's one of those things that I think ultimately one of us years from now is going to get another bite at the apple to do a Tupac movie that really.
I was going to ask, is it going to be, is somebody else going to try to give more honor to the legacy of Tupac? Because I personally thought, as a huge hip hop fan, I almost felt disrespected by that movie, to be honest. And I just hope that, they do make another film about Pac and it's done with a little bit more honor.
I mean, I think there's going to be another, there's going to be another opportunity. I think that people are going to want to do more because, I think 10 years after Tupac's death, I mean, when we would call him the hip hop version of Elvis or like, this honored person that everybody has this regard for, people felt that was an exaggeration. Now, 20 years after his death, people realize that he is a musical icon that its legend only grows more and more. The same with Biggie, who's also about to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So I feel like there's going to be more opportunities, and not just one. I feel like there are going to be numerous movies made about Tupac's life, as well as Biggie. I think there's going to be other things that get made.
You were on the documentary, weren't? No. You were on the documentary on Netflix.
Yeah, I get interviewed for a number of documentaries about both, and I'm always honored to do it because I really feel like they were icons, important icons. I mean, you much like as you see Bob Marley over my shoulder in this on this fridge in my attic. I mean, Pac and Big loom over hip hop in the same way.
I enjoyed that series. I don't know why I don't remember the name of it, but the one that was based on Pac and Biggie, I just can't remember it.
Oh, are you talking about Unsolved?
Yes, I enjoyed that.
Yeah, I mean, it has some really good performances.
I enjoyed that.
I think like a lot of us insiders who were actually there, like we have frustrations because it's like, but I think the thing is like, a lot of the truth of what happened is only going to start coming out, in the years that come, because there's a lot of stuff we don't know. And at the same time, I mean, I think it's like JFK or anything else. Like as time passes, people will talk about what happened. Like I think if I had a dream, not a dream, like I think at some point I would love to do like an Irishman version of that story where, at some point, somebody's going to tell the whole truth about what happened and then have the ability to really do a movie that goes deep into that. But I mean, first, I think you really need to talk more about their lives. You really need to understand Tupac Amaru,
exactly,
and not just numeral 2 PAC.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And and the same is true in terms of Biggie. All right, so someone
wants to know what you thought about the Wu-Tang TV series.
I thought the Wu-Tang series was dope. It was kind of a great year for Wu-Tang, but between that series and also at the same time, the Sasha Jenkins documentary I thought was excellent as well. I really thought that people are beginning to fully understand their legacy and the importance of that legacy. And it's also what's also great is the fact that they got to participate in both. So.
Yeah, because a lot of shows and films leave out the people that they're about,
Yeah.
The Winnie Mandela movie, they didn't want Jennifer Hudson to meet Winnie Mandela, and she snuck and met her anyway. Like, fuck that, I want to meet her anyway. Right. And she got in a lot of trouble because of that.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's always politics, always.
So do you have any upcoming projects?
I got a number. The reason I don't like talking about upcoming projects is that everybody talks about an upcoming project, then it never happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and for me, probably the same way that she was an influence on Lukecage,
Mm-hmm.
Beyonce has kind of become a influence on me in terms of creatively, from the standpoint of Beyonce doesn't announce shit anymore.
Nothing,
she just drops it. And like the combination of doing that with Marvel and Netflix, and then at the same time also seeing how she does it, I kind of ascribe to the same thing. Like, mind you, I've been busier than ever, but like this isn't even me being cagey. Like, I don't like talking about anything until it's actually finished. Like, I've got a pilot right now that I'm writing as part of my Amazon deal, that I'm hoping when I actually finish the draft, the latest draft, and hopefully knock on wood or whatever it is that it goes, I'll definitely talk about it then, and hopefully we can have more conversations.
What Amazon deal are you referring to? You have a multi-deal with them, multi-project deal?
Well, it's not the deal that I have with Amazon is not like about one specific project. It's the opportunity to write things and then at the same time bring other things to them, and just trying to get this one thing finished, and hopefully the floodgates will open on everything else.
Well, is there anything that you would like the audience to know that I haven't drilled you about yet?
Not really. I mean,
you know what?
I don't know. I always get a lot of questions about the writing process, and I think the one thing that I would say is that you don't have to ask for permission to do this if it's what you want to do. But the one thing you do have to focus on itself is the work, because the work does not get easier. It's a lot more fun now, but there's also a lot more pressure, and so what I would say is that whether you're getting paid a lot of money to write something or you're writing for free, the work doesn't change, and so if you have to put it at the center and the quality, the only thing that you can control is the quality of what you hand in. Everything else is like, once that happens, if you're lucky enough to get something made, at least in television, you get to really kind of, be a part of it happening more than it is in film, unless you become a director. And that's the other thing that I aspire to do is I'm hoping that some of these next things that I write, I'll get to direct as well. And yeah, it's just, what I say is just wear your mask, keep writing.
And Zink wants to know, are you staffing for upcoming writers' rooms?
Eventually, yes, but I can't staff until I get a green light. I can't get a green light until I finish the script. And I'm already an hour off deadline because I was supposed to be writing today, and I got to write right after this. So hopefully I can finish the script and get it up and running for you to have the opportunity to get in that room.
Well, Black man, I definitely appreciate you. Honored that you took time out of your schedule to sit down with me and chit chat and talk the shebang bang. So I appreciate you in full. I definitely learned a lot about you that I honestly did not know while researching you. So, I'm very grateful for that. And one of the reasons why I do MECCAcon is not just to talk about the popular on paperwork stuff or how did you get into this and what was your, I wanted to expand on each project and have you talk about different things that a lot of other people haven't interviewed you about, because a lot of fans like to know like specific details about stuff, even the critique, not just the good bubblegum stuff, but also the stuff that you felt like you could have improved on, other people could have improved on. So I appreciate you and thank you so much.
No, and thank you for having the opportunity, for me to talk, and I appreciate it. And I'm about to blow my son up because he's about to see now Jomo's on camera. So
what up?
Hi. But here we are. And yeah, it's just writing and life, and I'm just it was fun to just for half a second kind of talk about I can't believe it's been so long. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I remember 92, 93 like it was yesterday. And then to flash forward and be still doing what I was doing back then, but on a different level, it's just truly a blessing. And I just not only thank you for the opportunity to talk about it, I also thank you for the opportunity to just even think about it, because sometimes unless you pause, you don't really think about all the things that you've done or really have had the opportunity to be a part of. And so I'm just thankful and grateful every single day. And thank you again for having me.
All right. I appreciate you.
Okay. And definitely take care.
You too, brother.
All right. Peace.